All right, Mike, if you want to give a quick intro, and then I'll kind of let people in as they go up.
All right, absolutely. Uh, Good afternoon, everybody. Just turned noon. My name is Mike Harrison. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Community Outreach at BioForward. Wanted to welcome you to another BioForward webinar. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping up here at the top, which is BioForward just got done with a very successful biohealth summit. Hopefully many of you were able to attend. We again sort of broke our attendance records, and we're compiling all the data right now, but it seems like it was a great success. And thanks to everybody that spoke and helped that go off so smoothly. I just want to let you know that we're continuing to do events like this coming up soon. In fact, we have a couple before the end of the year. Next week, actually, November 6th. Women in Biohealth is doing an in-person event on the unwritten rules of being a woman in the workplace. That is on November 6th at 5 p.m. at Catalent. On November 14th, there's a members-only meeting of the Environmental Health and Safety Working Group. So if you have an interest in that topic and you're a member of BioForward, we would be happy to meet virtually at noon on November 14th. And then for all of our members, we have our upcoming end of the year celebration, December 12th. That's happening at the Edgewater in Madison. It's a great opportunity to relax at the end of the year and just enjoy some drinks and some snacks and network constantly. So it's a great time. So the webinar series here is dedicated to bringing the industry some information that we think is both topical and also actionable. So that spirit brings me to today's talk. So automation is a tool that's on everybody's mind with rising costs and talent shortages, but it can be difficult to know where to implement automation, and even more difficult to start using it altogether. So we thought it would be great to bring in an expert to talk about the particular challenges and advantages of automation in medical device and life sciences. So I'm happy to introduce Steve Kinderman with Isthmus Engineering to speak on that topic today. And before I completely toss it off to Steve, I wanted to say we encourage you to ask questions. There'll be some times probably during the session where Steve will take a break and answer some questions. And then there'll be definitely some time for discussion at the end as well. So just remember to put them in the chat and take it away, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Kinderman. I'm with Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin. We've been here 40 years or so. And so today's webinar is going to be kind of a more of an introduction to how our experience and how we've grown into this industry and where we see it going based on our experiences. So this slide deck I'm going to go through here is trying to capture both a sampling of the experience we've had over the years with the medical device and life sciences industry, showing some examples, showing what we see as commonplace questions for introducing automation into the industry, and some examples of successes that we've had and where we see the future of automation in the life sciences and medical device arenas. So with that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a introduction to our agenda today, which will introduce our company, give you a little background of what we've done, what markets and technologies we play in, the automation area of biohealth and what processes are typically been identified as candidates for automation. How do we scope and start the identifying areas that are good candidates for automation, as well as some examples. So, hopefully give you some tactile experiences and examples that we've had in the industry to to leverage where it may work for you. So this company's been around, like I said, for 45 years. I've been in the industry for 30 years. We're located on the east side of Madison. Our name came from the Isthmus of Madison. That's where we first started downtown, since moving out to a larger facility east of town. The markets that we typically have been working in and are growing into are heavily dominated by medical, life sciences, consumer products, transportation, light industry is something that's also kind of balances our market exposure. But the highest rate of growth is by far the medical and life sciences industry. Technologies that we employ into the projects within the industries are assembly of devices, handling and packaging of devices, as well as system integration and other web handling, converting processes, custom processes that kind of capture the balance of needs for certain customers. The area of biohealth and life sciences and how automation can support that is pretty vast. This picture captures a little bit of what we've done, but in general, areas that manufacture medical devices, either implantables or diagnostics, inpatient disposables. Obviously, those are going to be high volume type devices, component kitting, and then lab preparation. Lab automation is probably the biggest area of growth potentially for us that we see in the future. So as far as the targets for automation, the areas that most commonly are identified is any kind of discrete component assembly that requires repetitive and precision operations, as well as lab processes. So that's the topic of lab automation I mentioned earlier. That's where we're seeing a lot of potential for the talent that is hard to often gain in these lab processes. Manpower is not a trivial topic when it comes to some of these larger growth areas. Pipetting, aliquoting, aspiration, some of those examples. Material handling, instrument tending are other areas for automation. Any type of dispensing or qualitative inspections for the processes, including vision, leak testing, checkways, and then any other type of forming processes with ultrasonic welding, heat staking, etc. So a good list of targets that typically are common when we're going into new facilities, either startups or longstanding manufacturers. Some key drivers for automation that we see going into a potential application or a request from a customer would be items that are high volume, low mix. Those are probably the easiest target for automation when you can have repetitive operations designed in. This is where we're talking about robotics and high volume build automation. Ergonomics and safety concerns are another driver to automate. If there are pace setting operations where throughput and uptime are required. Quality driven processes, of course, traceability, chain of custody, those are all key drivers for handling a product from its origin to completion, or a process from origin to completion. And any labor intensive, ergonomic, challenging, or repetitive tasks, also a key driver for being a candidate, I guess, for automation. So how do we typically get started? We would try to first initiate an understanding of the process and the requirements, get as much history from the customer, from the application as possible. Is this a new process? Is this a mature process that is requiring scalability and higher throughput, or is just the growth of the platform driving the need for higher labor count or for automation equipment. So in terms of the nuts and bolts on getting started, we'd typically look for a statement of work that's generated to identify the need, identify the boundaries and the we'll call it the stakes in the ground on what scope is in play here. That request for proposal then would also identify any in the case of a medical device, any type of product variance, any process sequence or steps that help us identify the need for what technologies would be used to accomplish that. And then throughput, cycle times, obviously the volumes, the yields, are a big requirement and driver of getting return on investment for automation. The quality requirements are also a big component to that. And of course, where is this going? Is the footprint, which we know is valuable to most consumers and most customers, what is it going to take for the lab space or the manufacturing space? We'd also require at that time typically sample parts, drawings, models, anything that helps us identify what we're working with, as well as any process drivers that the application would require. Of course, we'd take advantage of on-site visits and any other available information, videos, pictures, things of that nature, and then hopefully identify what kind of scope or schedule this is being evaluated under, what kind of return on investment requirements are needed, and then it becomes a very workable back and forth application for supplying solutions. And I'll get into those kind of actionable items after this. But at this point, I'll stop and just maybe take a quick break and see if there's any questions leading up to this that the group has.
So there's no questions in the chat as of yet. I don't know if anybody has a question, if they want to raise their hand.
All right, then we'll continue on. So once we've got started in identifying the application, the next steps are for us to internally, derive preliminary solutions. Layouts and concepts are the first thing we start with. The goal here is to draft enough of a response that we can put high-level schedule and budget estimates together, high-level solutions in a concept form. That I'm taking a large system that we put very elementary concepts together that identify processes, more of a block layout that communicates, the understanding of a need that we're working on, and ultimately allows us some visual tools to communicate back and forth on a potential solution to a problem. And what this will ultimately mean in any application is, are we understanding the request, and do we have enough to at least begin putting budgetary estimates together and process flow estimates together to address the scope of concern. Once this concept development is prepared, we would typically communicate that back to the customer and determine, what level of additional funding is needed to take this to a more detailed layout. Take this to a presentable fashion for more formal proposals and more formal cost estimating, and also identify any, risk areas in the processes. Is there risk that needs to be mitigated or tested because this is going, say, from a very manual operation to an automated aspect. And if that means putting some benchtop equipment together, we'll typically do that in the form of our lab space here, where we can bring in devices, technologies to, I'm showing one here on my desk that was used in a recent lab development, and it allowed us to perform what we call proof of process testing, prototyping. It, at the end of the day, is a risk mitigation tool. We're identifying the challenges that we have, and hopefully identifying solutions for those challenges. The other areas that this early development will do is allow us to perform tests that identify any pace setting operations that are going to drive this solution. What are the weak links in the chain, and what are the pace setters of the operation, so we can do full blown feed trials and process trials that identify those cycle times. This phase of the development also allows us to refine early concepts, early, we'll call it cartoon drawings, that develop into more formal designs, or at least design foundations that would carry on into a finished piece of equipment. Very common in the biohealth area is identifying GAMP documentation for any process equipment, and one of those documents is a functional specification. So in this phase of the project, we typically start drafting a functional specification to help identify both the technology and the requirement. So the technology used to solve the requirement of dispensing or pipetting or transfer is laid out in this specification draft. The acronyms we're throwing up here, EDO, CDO, they're our own acronyms, and what they allow us to do is develop these processes in collaboration with the customer at the early stages of the project. From that point, the idea of a design build piece of equipment is at least identified from a scope, and then would follow into a typical project flow of planning, design. We've agreed on a solution target and a design scope. Our facility would take that with a design team and complete engineering through the building and testing, the on-site acceptance at our facility, which would go through all of these bullet items you see listed on the screen here, from pre-FAT or pre-facility acceptance testing to the documentation, and go through that on-site, meeting the customer's acceptance before we take the equipment to their facility and perform a service and support phase of the project, which is installing, training operators on site, and doing more acceptance testing to mirror the facility testing that was done previously. Kind of getting into this a little bit more, which is probably a little more meaty for you guys on understanding what this equipment may look like. Some example projects, in the med device and life sciences field, we'll kind of walk through these and may give you a better feel for what type of equipment we're talking about here. So there's two different custom processes on the screen here. On the left side, this is a lab automation where we're performing a sample prep and process that is coming into the lab, and it needs to get processed for ultimate downstream testing outside of the scope of the automation. And the automation that we're showing here was driven by, again, the labor challenge of performing this at a scaled rate of production, of sample production. So centrifugation, robot tending, and integration of those centrifuges was a big system component of this. Sample pipetting and aliquoting, another very large component of this system, as well as custom slant mixers and other robotic transfer operations that, again, needed to mimic and produce in a traceable fashion that which was being done manually. Another application to the right over here is assembly and traying. So this particular application was kind of a combination of process and assembly. We built a custom piece of equipment to automatically assemble a tube that contained sample material. The processes involved was ultrasonic welding, inline die cutting and sealing, a leak testing operation of that tube, nozzle dispense and a diving nozzle dispense application that included a checkway, as well as product labeling and traying for downstream production use. Assembly applications are pretty common with medical devices. So we've got high volume product that needs to be assembled at a high rate, high quality, high uptime, and that runs a pretty good range of product from, as we mentioned earlier, disposable devices, test devices, inpatient care components, implantables, and all of these share some similar needs when it comes to automation. Example on the left here is a medical applicator that required, as a plastic applicator that required components being fed in, a inline dispensing system, in this case a peristaltic dispensing system, spin weld integration, and a full 100% in-process checkway, and then finally a print and apply label. This was used for a disinfectant applicator prior to a patient's surgery. The device on the right is again, a medical device used in ophthalmic surgery. It is a component that's built of, or a device built of multiple components that need to be fed in individually. They're all assembled in various fashions that include ultrasonic welding. We've got a silicone lubrication dispense requirement for a couple of the components, and the device itself is fully calibrated and functional tested at the end of the assembly to prepare it for shipment to the end use customers. So ultimately, these carry a laser 2D barcode that captures we'll call it the birth certificate information of this individual device. Other devices, disposable oral cleaning devices for inpatient care. And these are a very common component or type of component that we'll see automation built around. High volume, 25 parts a minute off of this machine, for example, also including ultrasonic welding, lubrication. We're going to do a mass flow test on 100% of the devices. And a chassis system in this particular case was a inline precision link conveyor that transferred these components from station to station throughout the progressive assembly process. Another device over here on the right is also an inpatient care device. This particular device was around a 20 part per minute application, and built multiple machines to achieve the scalability of volume needed for this particular component. The layout of this system was comprised of 4 independent process modules that each built a segment in progression to ultimately complete the device. And there was a series of different technologies used in this, from ultrasonic welding, precision die cutting, all the way through packaging into end user packaging. Some material handling systems that, in the life sciences that we see, accessioning is a very common one. Taking product coming back into the labs, accessioning that product into lab testing prep conditions. So that usually includes unboxing, sample transfer, and then a large concentration on traceability for chain of custody, as well as any kind of labeling, additional barcoding and marking that's required for tracking that product through the system, and other technologies used, checkweigh inspection, robotic sorting. And you can see it's quite a large system in this particular example. The system on the right is more of a sub or a pre-prep application, getting the devices, the disposable devices prepared, labeled for downstream lab prep. So in this case, we're bringing components in, 50 ml tubes, reading matching barcodes, applying barcodes as necessary, and transferring and staging the tubes for downstream use. Packaging and material handling, also very common. As we get downstream from, say, the assembly or any of the process, if this is a project that is a saleable item or an item that needs to get packaged in a way for distribution, we'll be involved in a lot of these higher end custom packaging applications where in this particular case on the left, we have a over-the-counter consumer good that's quite high volume, and we collaboratively worked with the customer to develop both the package and the automation to create that package, fill the product, and hit the rates that were required, which at 60 parts a minute, were higher than typical. On other devices that require custom packaging is kitting. And in the medical industry, we see a lot of kitting needs for either inpatient or in surgical applications where kits are involved. We'll employ flex feeding systems because there's typically going to be multiple kit recipes for a given product. We've got in-feed systems that'll be flexible because not all products are nice and manageable. They're flexible in nature and need flexible systems to feed them. So what we mean by that is a lot of times vision guided robotics, et cetera, are used for that type of product feeding. So that kind of brings us to the end of the slide deck, but would like to open up any kind of questions or comments that we could maybe go into more detail on. If you want me to back up and go through any examples of what I have just read through, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, there's still not any questions in the chat, but I had a few questions for you. So why don't I get things started off here?
You bet.
So when you work with a client and you put in like an automated solution, is there a like how long is the testing period? Is there kind of like a pass fail type like first initiation of an automated process, and how long do you follow it out before like a company may decide this is working great or this just isn't working for us?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Every project is of course unique, but in most cases, we're brought in at the early stages of either a product's maturity, where the product itself is now, in the case of a medical device, the product has been designed, but hasn't gone to final completion of design for manufacturability. And so we'll be many times involved in any modifications for that product to have it fit automation And those early timeframes are anywhere from, a few weeks to a few months, depending on what level of maturity that product is. And maybe to carry that a little bit further, some of the mature products that come in and just have seen a scale requirement on the customer's end because of volumes. Volumes have driven this need for automation. And at that point, we can typically turn around early solutions within several weeks and determine if this testing that I mentioned earlier is required. That's typically a 2 to 3 month process where we'll test any of the risk areas of manufacturing or automating the manufacture of this product. And at that time, we can go into a Q&A with the customer of, is this acceptable, and can we launch into a full project build? To describe a full project build again in an example format, let me use one of these up here that, a product comes in that has some maturity in design. For example, this is an adapter used in oral cleaning for inpatient care for compromised patients, and to keep the mouth area clean. This device quite high volume. So this came in as a need, and in a fully designed stage. And a typical project like this was probably close to 9 months to a year to do the full design, build, and implementation of a medical device. Some of the processes that we pointed to earlier that I would call lab automation. We're taking conventional lab procedures and what are typically technician run. We're taking that to an automated level. That is typically going to be a longer cycle of preparation, testing, and build. Not always, but in most cases, you're going to have some testing that needs to essentially do a complete change from the current norm of technicians performing the procedures to robots and hardware performing the procedures. So those are going to be more often than not longer cycles of testing and development.
We did get a question in. Katrina asks, as an architect working with you, what would you need from us to create a room or building with utilities properly located, sized, finished, lighting levels, ceilings, exiting, etc.? How can we work better with companies such as yourself?
Excellent. Yeah, that's part of every one of these projects that are going into lab space or new build lab space is identifying airflow, clean room levels. And, what we try to do is work fairly early on with the architects to identify footprint. Obviously, when it comes to structural requirements of the space, we want to build around those, of course. And we'll usually, within the first, 4 to 6 weeks of a project start, have enough of a layout to start conversing with the architects in any kind of build out requirements that we need. And what that usually includes is ventilation requirements. If we're doing any type of welding processes, laser marking processes, we'd want to know access to the room. A lot of times this equipment gets quite large, and we run into that later in the game, which would be nice to run into early in the game, is identifying access to the room so we can move the equipment in, as well as mentioned earlier, the structural. There's going to be beams in the way that we need to work around. And so early in the game is a good time to be working with the architectural group.
So kind of, piggybacking off of that too. So, a lot of like manufacturing floors and things like that are now being built kind of open with like flexible equipment and processes in mind. How do you set up like an automated process, knowing that companies are trying to be flexible and trying to think about maybe completely rearranging the processes or shifting focus in like a few years? How does that go into the overall design process?
Yeah, that's always a challenge is to be able to have that crystal ball when you're trying to design something, for a given state. But we do employ, design forward means to most projects, knowing that in the case of med devices, there may be variants that are going to be part of the process in the future, but they're not identified yet. And so we'll work with the customer to at least um, define the bread box, of what we're potentially going to need to grow into. And so we'll keep that in mind with the architecture of the equipment to allow for flexible changes to the product itself. It's again, if it's a device, can we do something as simple as just change some tooling on the machine to allow for a new device in the future? Or do we change the chassis of the system? That what I mean by chassis is the delivery of the product through the processes. Can we make that a more flexible system? Can we, from the day one, if we know there's going to be some growth, either potentially process additions or product changes, do we design that in day one to better handle it down the road? And I think that's very common in these, as you mentioned, flexible systems that are going through 2.0, 3.0 changes down the road. How do you prepare for that? And we try to take that into account as much as we can without compromising the system. Of course, you don't want to make it so flexible that you've doubled the size of the system for what it's needed for today.
Kind of also along those lines, so I'm thinking like small companies, companies that are just getting started with automation. They may have only the space and the resources to maybe automate like one process that's kind of a sticking point for them. And but I also thinking about the future and thinking about expanding. I know interoperability is always an issue with these complicated machine setups. How do you what's the best strategy for a company to go after with just automating one process without kind of painting themselves in the corner by getting a black box that doesn't really communicate with other things? You understand what I'm asking?
I think so.
I don't quite have the vocabulary to speak like an engineer.
No, I think I do. That is pretty common with a lot of the smaller or new to volume production customers that we have, where at the very least what's identified early on is part of the process that's repetitive enough to justify automation, and many times there's a stair step of equipment that we would consider looking at, which is sometimes you hear it termed manumation. So it's a semi-automated solution that takes some of the ergonomic workload away from the operator and puts it more into an automated solution, and allows the customer to step into the early phases of automation without requiring a lot of times there just isn't the justification for a full line production. But if there are targeted areas of the process that could be semi-automated or automated within a module, that's very common as well. Did that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, I think it did.
Okay.
We had another question come in from Eric. He says, does your team offer solutions for fairly low complexity automation?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, just mentioned, the manumation or semi-automated areas is very common within the lower volume components, things like I mentioned earlier, implantables, where the volumes aren't quite at a over-the-counter level, but still have the precision need of processing, handling, and in those cases, we've built some fairly technical lab stations that are manually charged. So operators would feed these systems with components that would allow automation to take over if it were dispensing, for example, or assembly process or leak testing. That is also something we get into, and yeah, the smaller systems are kind of the key driver towards any kind of scalability in the future.
Another question for you. So as I was kind of reading up a little bit about automation, one sort of future trend that keeps coming up is smart automation. So I assume there's that some of the systems that you're working with have some sort of machine learning components to them, and I know people are very much interested anytime anyone mentions AI, and I was wondering if that is something that is what do you see in the industry from your perspective as far as creating more advanced automation solutions that can make decisions and maybe even self-optimize?
Yeah, it's definitely an area of extreme interest for us as well as everybody else, and we're kind of on that same learning curve, I think, as everyone is identifying what areas of our industry would that type of advanced learning fit. The first areas we're seeing right now are vision inspection. So cameras have that ability. I mean, they're the engine for a lot of what we see in terms of AI self-learning, where we can take images of certain processes or components or states of completion and allow that vision system to self-teach and learn over time. And we're starting to do that already on current applications. That's probably the first area that we're seeing it, as well as the terms that people have maybe used in collaboration. There's also robotic self-learning, and the idea of operators working with robots and what are termed collaborative robot formats is quite common. So we're just kind of getting our foot in the water on AI and where it applies in this industry, but fully aware that it's probably going to grow over time in the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is anything that you really run into all that often, but I was going to ask you, when a company is first starting to implement automation, there can be some resistance from employees, having to learn new skills and just kind of the changing of a company's culture altogether can be, can have some negative effects on employees. Do you ever run into issues like that? And do you have any advice or any tips or anything that you use for companies that are making that transition and might be running into a culture clash?
That's a great question. Happened a lot more, and for different reasons, years ago. Years ago, we were the bad guys coming in replacing operators, and that there needed to be some sensitivity around that, especially as we're walking the plant floor, trying to keep a low profile as requested by a given customer, for example, with this change, this culture change in mind. And yeah, it was something you had to be aware of and take seriously and address it. That doesn't happen as much these days. These days, just the challenge of getting talent um, kind of, it somewhat supersedes the concern of bringing in automation. However, the need to support this automation is a challenge from, some customers' point of view if they're just getting into it. And I think handling that, on an educational level is something we try to do on what it means to support this type of equipment and what level of in-house support you'll need to have for managing new technology. What type of additional talent might you need to bring in to support this new technology. So yeah, in the history, it was always a concern when you're going into a high volume production area with a lot of operators, a lot of manpower. That was a big culture shift, and it over time, in the last 15, 20 years, it's been lessened because the automation culture is pretty prevalent, but now it's more of a talent challenge. Can we get the talent that's necessary to support this type of equipment, and what is needed? And we try to do a good job of educating the customers on the front end of what that requirement will be.
It's sticking with that talent question. You mentioned,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm having to bring in, employees with new skills, or maybe having to reskill some of their current employees in order to operate or maintain the machinery. I have two questions there. So one is, do you see people, nowadays, do you see people doing more reskilling, or do you see people hiring new employees, or is it kind of a mix?
It's a
And
mix.
then okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead and answer that, and I'll ask my next question.
Yeah, it's definitely a mix because in most cases, we learn from the current operators that are there because we're trying to understand what the process is, how it's affecting, how they affect what we may be designing to either supplement the current process or automate the current process. So, in many cases, it's just training current operators to tend. The machines that we're bringing in need tenders. They need people to keep them running. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, there's a different talent pool that's going to be required to do any type of, and again, typically a different talent pool required to do any type of preventive maintenance and just support of the technology that's being brought in. So that's like I said, a mix between both the current talent and additional talent to support the equipment.
And so my next part of that question then is, I know that there's kind of a push to make some of these automation solutions more, user friendly, as in like very low coding necessary or no coding at all, or using like visual icons to allow them to make changes to the automation solution. Are you seeing a lot of that, or are people kind of sticking to the tried and true solutions?
I guess I need you to expand on that a little bit. Coding of the products themselves, or
Yeah, so like if they were using like a liquid handling robot,
sure.
Having to, if they have to change the volume, they might have to go in and actually, change the code in some like older solutions, and now they're trying to make things more visually simple and easy for just about any technician to operate.
Yeah, we take a hard look at that at the very beginning, and what that involves is just intuitive interfaces to the machine. So we'll build a system that comes in, and ultimately, I'm going to try to find something that I can show you an example of. Ultimately, we would work with the operators themselves and try to build a front end interface so that they're not going in and changing coding or anything like that. They're going to go in and
okay.
select an icon on a touchscreen. It's as simple as that. Obviously, it's more dedicated to any individual process. But like this picture right here, I can get slick here and zoom in. So each process or each piece of equipment would have an interface for that operator that would be, they would be trained on to go in and do any type of monitoring, any kind of diagnostics for that particular process, and any changes that need to be made. So if there's recipe selection for a given component or a given process, they would make those changes right on that touchscreen.
I see. Okay. If anybody has any final questions, I think we're going to wrap it up in a minute or two. Go ahead and put it in the chat if you have another question. But otherwise, I was going to ask maybe one more question, and that was, have you ever run into a process that people want to automate, and you're of the opinion this is not something that should be automated? Is there anything that you kind of advise to not automate?
Oh yeah, that's a tricky one. There's plenty of them. Yeah, there's plenty of operations and procedures or processes that don't have the reliability, and that's where the development comes in. And a lot of times we can use our experience to, if they've got a material, for example, that doesn't like to behave, and I think we can imagine what that might be. We call them noodles, but it might be a web material or an extruded material, but something that just has such a flexible nature to it that it's hard to manage from whatever aspect needs automating. Whether it's fitting to a shape or a welding process. That's where the development comes in. We are definitely not bashful to respond back with that type of discovery, and there's definitely cases where if there's tolerances or precision requirements that are outside of an acceptance level that could be maintained, those are other cases where you might want to look at continuing in a manual mode or a different process change to make this fit your automation. So there's always cases. It's hard to pick just one, but there's definitely going to be cases where automation just isn't a good fit, no doubt.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing,
well,
what we're seeing, Michael, is
kind of
we are seeing, I think, just to kind of finish this or end this discussion here, is more and more curiosity of processes that have the potential to be automated, and the cost of automation, with respect to the technology, has come down over the years. Robots, for example, I'm just kind of now talking componentry, but hardware has come down in overall cost, and the application fits, have grown for these technologies, be it robots or dispense systems or vision systems. Those types of component technologies have increased in terms of variety and capability. So what I see that being is that the opportunities in different areas of the life sciences and med devices, that has grown. The opportunities have opened up because of the technologies that are now available. So we're seeing that in nothing but a growth pattern right now.
There's never been a better time to get into automation.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thanks to Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing for presenting today. So yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you who attended. This will be recorded. This was recorded. We will get you everyone that registered a link to that recording. And I'm sure if you have any questions or anything, you can reach out to to Steve at Ideal or at Isthmus Engineering. And with that, I'll let you have the rest of your afternoon. All right, so take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael.